They don't clap for the nights you cried in silence. They don't see the scars that taught you how to smile through pain. You survived what crushed bloodlines, what rewrote destinies, what left others begging for mercy. Funny thing is, survival isn't victory, it's a receipt. Every betrayal charged interest. Every loss took a piece you'll never get back. You didn't break. You adapted. And adaptation has a dark sense of humor. They like to call it luck, because luck sounds clean, harmless, almost polite. Luck doesn't scream at night or grind its teeth while staring at the ceiling. Luck doesn't crawl through days that feel designed to erase you. What you did wasn't lucky. It was ugly, exhausting, relentless endurance. The kind that doesn't get applause because it makes people uncomfortable. The kind that survives not because it hopes, but because quitting feels like letting the pain win, and that would be the real joke. You stayed standing when every system around you quietly suggested you shouldn't. When comfort abandoned you. When fairness stopped returning calls. When explanations ran out, and all that was left was time dragging you through it, whether you were ready or not. That wasn't fate giving you a gift. That was you refusing to disappear, refusing to give the world the satisfaction of your collapse, refusing even when refusing hurt more than surrender ever could. Endurance doesn't look heroic up close. It looks tired. It looks bitter. It looks like learning how to function while carrying things that were never meant to be carried this long. It looks like laughing at the wrong moments because crying would slow you down. It looks like getting up without believing things will improve, but knowing that staying down guarantees they won't. People confuse that with strength, but strength implies choice. Endurance happens when choice is stripped away and you move anyway. Every step forward was negotiated with pain. Every day survived came with a silent transaction. You paid in sleep. You paid in trust. You paid in softness you never got back. You learned how to ration hope, how to dull expectations, how to lower the volume on your own feelings so you could keep functioning. That's not bravery. That's survival mechanics. That's learning how to exist in a world that kept testing how much pressure you could take before something cracked. And the funniest part, the world loves the outcome, not the process. They admire the survivor, but would never volunteer for the journey. They ask how you did it, like there was a secret shortcut, like endurance is a motivational quote instead of a long hallway with no exits. They don't want the nights where time stopped moving. They don't want the moments where you realized nobody was coming to save you and adjusted accordingly. Endurance changes the way you see everything. You stop believing in guarantees. You stop romanticizing struggle. You stop trusting easy promises. You learn that survival isn't about winning. It's about lasting longer than what's trying to erase you. And once you learn that, you can never unlearn it. The world stops looking solid and starts looking fragile, like something that could fall apart at any moment if pushed the wrong way. You didn't survive because the universe was kind. You survived because something inside you refused to shut down, even when it had every reason to. Even when continuing felt pointless. Even when the reward for surviving another day was just another day to survive. That kind of endurance doesn't announce itself. It doesn't celebrate. It just keeps going, quietly daring the chaos to do worse. Pain never introduced itself as a teacher. It showed up like a vandal, smashing things you didn't even realize you loved yet. It didn't ask permission. It didn't explain the lesson plan. It just repeated itself until something in you started paying attention. At first you fought it, then you feared it, and eventually you learned how to listen without expecting mercy. That's how pain educates. Not with wisdom, but with consequences. Every time you thought you understood the rules, pain rewrote them. You trusted once and learned about betrayal. You hoped once and learned about disappointment. You opened up once and learned how quickly people weaponize vulnerability. Each experience etched a new rule into you, not because you wanted to grow, but because ignorance became too expensive to afford. Pain didn't make you smarter out of kindness. It made you alert out of necessity. It stayed. That's the part no one likes to admit. Pain didn't pass through like a storm. It moved in and rearranged the furniture. It became the background noise of your thinking, the quiet hum behind every decision. Even in calm moments, it whispered reminders of what happens when you let your guard down. You stopped asking, "What if it works?" and started asking, "What's the damage if it doesn't?" That shift wasn't pessimism. It was education. Pain taught you timing, when to speak, when to stay silent, when to disappear before things got worse. It sharpened your instincts until they felt almost cruel. You learned how to read rooms, how to hear what wasn't being said, how to spot the moment before everything collapses. People call that intuition. It's really just trauma with a good memory. It also taught you detachment. Not the peaceful kind people brag about, but the functional kind that lets you keep moving while parts of you are screaming. You learned how to compartmentalize emotions like files that could be opened later, if later ever came. You smiled while calculating exits. You laughed while bracing for impact. Pain didn't ask you to heal, it asked you to adapt, and adaptation became your default setting. Over time, pain stopped feeling dramatic. It became familiar, almost boring in its predictability. You stopped reacting loudly. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped expecting understanding. Pain trained you to conserve energy, to invest only where the risk felt survivable. That's how it becomes permanent. Not as an open wound, but as a framework for how you operate in the world. And the real lesson: pain doesn't leave when you pass the test. It stays to make sure you never forget what failing costs. It keeps you sharp, suspicious, prepared. It makes you dangerous in quiet ways. Not because you want revenge, not because you enjoy darkness, but because you've learned that comfort is temporary and awareness is survival. Pain didn't just teach you something once. It kept teaching until it became part of how you think, how you move, how you exist, Silence was never peaceful for you. It was heavy, watchful, always waiting for something to go wrong. While others made noise, asked for help, announced their struggles, you learned early that silence was safer. Not because no one could hear you, but because no one was really listening anyway. So you stopped explaining. You stopped knocking on doors that never opened. You carried everything yourself and called it normal. That's how strength started forming, not in gym mirrors or loud speeches, but in quiet decisions no one witnessed. The decision to get up when no one would notice if you didn't. The decision to keep your composure while something inside you cracked. The decision to absorb damage without broadcasting it, because vulnerability felt like handing ammunition to the wrong people. Silence became your armor, not because it was comfortable, but because it worked. In that quiet, you learned control. You learned how to keep your face neutral while chaos rearranged your insides. You learned how to respond instead of react, how to pause while others panicked. People mistook that calm for confidence, for leadership, for emotional maturity. They didn't see the cost of it. They didn't see how many feelings you buried just to maintain that composure. Strength in silence demands sacrifice, and you paid in pieces of yourself you never recovered. You stopped seeking validation because silence doesn't offer applause. There was no one to clap when you endured another disappointment, another betrayal, another night spent pretending you were fine. That absence of recognition changed you. You became self-contained, self-reliant to a fault. Depending on others started to feel reckless. Trust felt like an unnecessary gamble. Silence taught you that if something had to survive, it was better off in your own hands. And the longer you stayed quiet, the stronger you became in ways that made people uneasy. You didn't flinch easily. You didn't overshare. You didn't beg to be understood. That unsettled people who relied on noise to feel powerful. They couldn't read you, couldn't predict you, couldn't provoke the reactions they expected. Your silence turned into a mirror they didn't like looking into. But silence doesn't just build strength. It sharpens it. It makes it colder, more precise. You learned patience the hard way, learned how to wait out storms instead of fighting them. You learned how to conserve energy, how to strike only when necessary, how to walk away without announcing it. Strength born in silence isn't loud or flashy. It doesn't need to prove itself. It just stands there, unmoved, watching everything else exhaust itself, trying to matter loss. Doesn't politely remove things from your life. It rips them out and leaves the outline behind, so you're forced to stare at what used to be there. At first you think you're just grieving people, moments, versions of yourself. Then you realize something deeper went missing. The person you were before learned how fragile identity really is. You didn't just lose things. You lost certainty. You lost innocence. You lost the version of you that believed effort guaranteed results. Every loss demanded a recalibration. You couldn't keep being who you were and still survive what came next. So you adjusted. You hardened some edges. You dulled others. You replaced hope with caution, openness with strategy. Identity stopped being something you discovered and became something you assembled out of necessity. Piece by piece, loss dictated what stayed and what had to go. Not because you wanted to change, but because staying the same became dangerous. You noticed it in small ways first. The way you stopped getting excited too quickly. The way you measured people before trusting them. The way your laughter came with a delay, like it needed approval from your past experiences before showing up. Loss trained you to anticipate absence. You started preparing for endings before beginnings even settled. That wasn't negativity. That was conditioning. With each loss, something inside you learned restraint. You learned not to overinvest, not to reveal everything, not to assume permanence. Relationships became negotiations. Dreams became calculated risks. You didn't stop caring. You just learned how to care with one hand on the exit. Loss reshaped your emotional posture, turning you from an open door into a guarded hallway, where access had to be earned. People around you noticed the change, but misunderstood it. They called you distant, guarded, intense. They said you'd changed like it was a flaw, like identity was supposed to remain untouched by damage. They didn't see the blueprint beneath the scars. They didn't see how loss forced you to refine who you are just to keep functioning. Identity after loss isn't softer. It's sharper, more deliberate, less forgiving of illusions. You stopped identifying with roles that could be taken away. Titles, labels, relationships lost their power over how you saw yourself. Loss taught you that anything external could vanish without warning. So you rebuilt inward. You anchored identity to awareness, adaptability, control. Not happiness, not comfort, survival traits. The kind that don't look pretty, but don't disappear when everything else collapses. And somewhere along the way, loss stripped away performative versions of you. The one that tried to please. The one that chased approval. The one that believed being liked was safety. What remained was quieter, more observant, less impressed. You didn't become empty. You became selective. You didn't lose identity. You forged one under pressure, shaped by absence, reinforced by disappointment, refined by everything that left and never came back. Resilience sounds inspiring until you realize what it's made of. People praise it like a medal, like something you chose from a shelf. They don't talk about the price tag hanging underneath it. Resilience didn't arrive as confidence or courage. It showed up as necessity, as the only option left when everything else failed. You didn't build it because you wanted to be strong. You built it because breaking wasn't allowed anymore. Every time you bent without snapping, something else took the damage. You absorbed shock after shock, telling yourself you'd deal with it later. Later became a habit. You learned how to keep functioning while postponing your own repair. That's how resilience grows quietly toxic. It keeps you moving forward while slowly hollowing out the parts of you that used to feel. You became reliable, dependable, unshakable, And somewhere in that process, replaceable pieces of yourself went missing. People admire how much you can handle, not realizing you can handle it because you had no choice. They hand you more weight because you never drop it. They assume strength equals capacity, not cost. Resilience taught the world that you don't need help, and the world listened. It trained others to lean on you, while you learned how to lean on nothing at all. The cost showed up in exhaustion you couldn't explain, in joy that felt muted, in victories that didn't land the way they used to. You survived storms that should have left marks, but instead of scars on the surface, they settled deeper. Resilience taught you how to suppress reactions, how to minimize pain, how to keep going even when something inside you wanted to stop. That skill kept you alive, but it also taught you how to ignore your own warning signals. You stopped asking yourself what you wanted and started asking what was manageable. Dreams became practical. Desires became negotiable. You measured life in terms of endurance rather than fulfillment. That's the hidden exchange resilience demands. It keeps you standing, but it doesn't promise satisfaction. It ensures survival, not wholeness. Over time, resilience changed your relationship with pain. You didn't fear it anymore. You expected it. You planned around it. That sounds powerful until you realize how little room that leaves for softness. You learn to be prepared instead of hopeful, controlled instead of curious. Resilient people rarely fall apart in public, but they slowly disconnect in private. And the darkest part, you're praised for it, applauded for being strong, admired for never complaining, respected for pushing through. No one asks what it took. No one asks what you lost while becoming this unbreakable version of yourself. Resilience becomes your identity, and stepping out of it feels dangerous, like removing armor in a room that taught you to expect attacks. So you keep it on. Heavy, effective, expensive. You didn't walk out untouched. That's the lie people tell themselves to feel better about your survival. They look at you standing and assume nothing broke. They mistake composure for wholeness. What they don't understand is that survival doesn't preserve you, it alters you. It rearranges priorities, instincts, reactions. You didn't come back the same because the same person wouldn't have survived what you did. Change crept in quietly, not as a dramatic transformation, but as subtle adjustments you barely noticed at first. The way your trust became conditional, the way your patience shortened, the way certain emotions stopped visiting altogether. You didn't lose them in one moment, they faded after being ignored for too long. Survival taught you efficiency. Keep what's useful. Discard what slows you down. Softness didn't disappear because it was weak. It disappeared because it wasn't safe. You became sharper, more observant, less impressed. You started reading between words, scanning for threats where others saw comfort. You stopped taking things at face value. You learned that intentions don't matter as much as patterns. That shift wasn't bitterness. It was calibration. The world showed you how quickly things can turn, and you adjusted your settings accordingly. People say you're different now like it's an accusation. Like change is something to apologize for. They miss the version of you that was easier to predict, easier to influence, easier to disappoint. They don't realize that version was expensive to maintain. It required ignorance. It required optimism that reality kept punishing. You didn't become colder. You became precise. Even your wins feel different. Success doesn't excite you the way it excites others. Relief replaced celebration. Stability replaced ambition. You don't chase highs anymore because you know how violently they can crash. You prefer control over chaos, certainty over passion. That doesn't mean you're empty. It means you've learned what volatility costs. The hardest part isn't what changed. It's knowing it can't be undone. You can rest, but you can't unsee. You can slow down, but you can't forget. Survival left fingerprints on your thinking, your reactions, your silence. You navigate the world with a different map now, one drawn by pain instead of hope. You didn't emerge clean. You emerged functional, alert, altered, still standing but carrying adjustments that will never fully reverse. Because once you learn what it takes to endure, innocence doesn't survive the lesson, and whatever remains keeps moving forward with eyes open, guarded, aware, already calculating the next impact before it arrives.